The military gala at the U.S. Embassy in Paris looked like a recruiting ad that had come to life. Medals flashing, uniforms pressed so sharp they could cut you, and champagne glasses clinking under massive crystal chandeliers. I moved between tables in my black and white catering uniform, a tray of hors d'oeuvres balanced on my palm, blending into the background like a piece of furniture. That was the point. No one was supposed to see me as anything other than a waitress tonight, especially not my sister. But Emily always had a talent for finding me in a room, even when I didn't want her to. I spotted her across the marble floor, standing with two French military attachés, her red dress catching the light like she'd planned it. She laughed at something one of them said, then her eyes landed on me. That smile of hers, the one that always meant trouble, spread across her face. She didn't wait until I got closer. She raised her champagne glass slightly and said, loud enough for everyone around to hear, "Well, look at you. Just a waitress now, huh? Guess the Air Force didn't need you after all." One of the attachés chuckled awkwardly. The other pretended to study the art on the wall. Emily took a slow sip of champagne, never breaking eye contact. I kept my face neutral. I'd had 3 years to perfect that skill. I set the tray down in front of her and said, "Canapés?" The French attaché took one without looking at me. Emily didn't take anything. She just kept smiling like she'd already won some invisible argument. I moved on before she could add another jab. My pulse was steady. That was the job, keep moving, keep watching. This night wasn't about her, not entirely. There were bigger targets in the room. Everywhere I looked, there were brass and ribbons, generals from the US, colonels from France, defense contractors, politicians. If you wanted to take a snapshot of NATO's upper crust, this was it. And right in the center of it all was Philip Vaughn, the man I'd been tracking for months. He was shaking hands with a tech executive I recognized from a cybersecurity conference years back. I didn't slow down, but my eyes locked on the small, gift-wrapped box Vaughn slipped into the man's jacket pocket. I weaved between waitstaff carrying trays of wine, noting where the embassy security officers were posted. Their eyes were on the guests, but not the ones I was watching. That was fine. Tonight, I wasn't relying on them. A group of American officers near the bar burst into laughter over some story, blocking my view for a second. When they stepped aside, I caught sight of General Marcus Delaney, the 4-star in charge of U.S. European Command holding court with a handful of senior diplomats. The kind of man you didn't just bump into unless you had a reason. I had one. I kept moving, letting the rhythm of the room carry me. The band played soft jazz, the kind people only notice when it stops. The smell of roast lamb and fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. Somewhere near the entrance, the French ambassador was giving a short speech in both languages, but no one in this part of the room was listening. Emily reappeared at my side without warning. She had a knack for that, too. "Do they at least let you eat the leftovers?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I gave her the kind of polite half-smile you'd give a stranger on a bus. "Enjoy your night, Emily." She tilted her head, studying me like she was trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting the way she expected. "Don't tell me you're still bitter about the past. You really should move on. It's embarrassing." If she only knew how much I'd moved on. I stepped away before she could push harder. My earpiece crackled softly 2 words from a voice I knew well. "Package moving." I didn't acknowledge it out loud, just shifted my route toward the far side of the ballroom. Vaughn was heading in that direction, weaving through the crowd with the same tech executive in tow. As I passed one of the tall windows overlooking the embassy courtyard, my reflection looked exactly like it was supposed to: anonymous. Forgettable. That's what made it work. No one was looking for Catherine Lowell, former Air Force counterintelligence officer. They were looking right past her. The general's group shifted toward the center of the room, closer to Vaughn's path. Timing here mattered. The wrong move too early, and I'd blow everything. Too late, and it wouldn't matter what I knew. I caught another glimpse of Emily across the room. She was laughing again, but this time it looked forced, her eyes flicking toward me for just a second. Maybe she was wondering why I was here at all. Maybe she already suspected. Didn't matter. Tonight wasn't about making her wonder. It was about making the right people see exactly what they'd missed before. And that moment was getting closer, with every step Vaughn took. I adjusted the tray in my hands, scanning the room one more time. Delaney was still talking, unaware of how fast the evening was about to change. Vaughn was closing the gap, the small box still hidden in the inside pocket of his jacket. I moved into position. My fingers tightened slightly on the tray as I stepped toward the side door, my body moving on instinct. The clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation faded in my head, replaced by the steady memory of a different room, 3 years earlier, where every eye in the place was locked on me. Back then, I wasn't in a catering uniform. I was in Air Force blues, pressed perfectly, ribbons aligned to regulation, shoes so polished they reflected the overhead lights. I'd been summoned to a closed-door review at USAF Cyber Defense Command headquarters. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and recycled air. Colonel Mason sat at the head of the long table, the kind of man who could deliver good news or ruin your life without changing his expression. On his right, a panel of officers from OSI and JAG. On his left, 2 people from the NATO Liaison Office. Every one of them had a folder in front of them, and every one of those folders had my name printed on the cover. Captain Lowell, Mason began. You're here regarding a security breach involving classified radar data under your clearance. I kept my voice level. Sir, I identified that breach. I reported it. That's not what our evidence shows. He tapped the folder in front of him. They laid out a neat little package. Access logs showing my credentials, timestamps that lined up perfectly with the stolen files, and an IP trace conveniently matching my work terminal. Every counter-argument I made, they had an answer for. Every piece of proof I thought might help me had already been dismissed as inconclusive. I asked for time to conduct my own review. They said no. I asked for an independent forensic analysis. They said it had already been done. The speed of their answers told me they'd made their decision before I even walked in. At one point, I glanced toward the observation window. Emily was there, in civilian clothes, speaking quietly to someone I didn't know. She didn't look at me. The meeting lasted less than an hour. The verdict was final. Honorably discharged, all clearances revoked, barred from accessing any classified systems. They didn't accuse me of treason outright, but the implication hung in the air like a bad smell. When it was over, I walked out carrying a cardboard box with my personal items, family photo, challenge coins, a coffee mug with the unit's logo. Emily was in the hallway, leaning against the wall like she was waiting for an elevator. You should just accept it, she said, her voice low. Fighting it will only make you look worse. I stopped, studying her face for any sign of sympathy. You knew about the breach. Her jaw tightened just enough to tell me I'd hit something. I can't discuss that. That's not a no. She pushed away from the wall. Go home, Katie. It's over. I watched her walk away, heels clicking against the tile. That sound stuck with me longer than the official discharge papers. The next few months were a blur of job applications and polite rejections. Civilian employers loved my skills on paper, but backed away when they found out why I left the service. Government contracts were out of the question. The Air Force had written a scarlet letter into my record, and no one wanted to touch it. I ended up back in Maine, in the small lakeside town where we grew up, took over a dusty little shop fixing laptops and cracked phone screens. Customers called me Miss Lowell, or Kate, if they remembered my name from school. No one called me Captain anymore. Some nights, I'd sit on the porch with a beer, staring out at the water, wondering if I'd made it all up, if my career had really happened, or if it was just a story I told myself to feel less useless. But every time I thought about the breach, about the details only I could have known, I came back to the same conclusion. Someone had framed me, and Emily had been close enough to know who. I didn't have proof. Not yet. But I held on to the one thing the Air Force hadn't taken from me. The ability to keep my mouth shut and wait for the right opening. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months after the discharge, a package arrived at the shop with no return address. Inside was a plain USB drive, unmarked except for a single word scratched into the plastic. Oracle, my old call sign. The files on it were encrypted, military grade. Whoever sent it knew I could crack it eventually. But there was something else in the envelope, a folded note in handwriting I recognized instantly. My father's, Katie, this is for when you're ready. Trust the timing. I stared at the words until the rain blurred them. Dad had been dead for 2 years. That meant whatever was on that drive had been meant for me long before the breach, maybe even before I knew there was one. That night, I locked the shop early and started working on the encryption. It didn't break in an hour. It didn't break in a week. But the fact it was there at all told me something important. I wasn't wrong about being set up. And if my father had left me something this sensitive, it meant there was still a way to set things right. I slid the USB drive into the secure laptop I kept under the counter, the one no customer ever saw. The encryption fought back like a locked safe, layers on layers, just the way my father would have done it. He'd served 30 years in Air Force intelligence and never trusted a lock with only one key. By midnight, I'd only peeled back the first layer. It was a directory with strange file names, nothing that made sense yet. But the real surprise wasn't digital. 2 weeks later, after a storm rolled through and knocked out power for half the town, I went into the attic of the old family house to check for leaks. That's when I noticed a loose floorboard under the corner trunk. I'd been in that attic hundreds of times and never seen it. The board came up easily, revealing a small metal handle. I pulled. A dust-covered safe sat in the dark space, just big enough to hold a few binders and maybe a pistol. The combination lock had a familiar feel, same model my dad used in his office. I tried the code I'd memorized as a kid, the one he said opened, the important stuff. The dial clicked, and the door swung open. Inside were 3 things: an external hard drive, a leather-bound journal, and a folded piece of paper with my name in his handwriting. The note was short. "Katie, if you're reading this, it means the storm came for you. This drive holds what I couldn't say, and the journal will tell you why. Some people you trust are not what they seem. Keep your head down until you have everything." I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, my jeans catching dust, and flipped open the journal. The entries started 5 years ago, before my discharge, when Dad had been stationed in Europe. At first, it was mundane. Training notes, project updates. But a few pages in, the tone shifted. He'd been tracking unusual data traffic on NATO radar systems pings from places they shouldn't have been, at times when no exercises were scheduled. He suspected an insider was passing technical specs to a third party. The deeper he dug, the more he mentioned a facilitator in the U.S. diplomatic corps. He never wrote the name, only initials. L. I stared at those letters until they blurred. The next entries documented meetings, small details, dates and locations: Brussels, Washington, Ramstein. He'd logged every anomaly, every unreturned call, every blocked inquiry. Then came an entry dated just weeks before his death, in a training accident. "The breach is closer than they think. If something happens to me, Katie will know who to trust." The external hard drive was another fortress of encryption. I wasn't going to crack it in an attic with a flashlight, so I carried everything back to my shop, locking the door behind me. Working on both drives became my nightly routine. During the day, I fixed people's busted tablets and cleaned out malware. At night, I chipped away at the security my father had left. He'd designed it so the files would open only in sequence: crack one, get a clue for the next. It was slow work, but the pieces started forming a picture. Intercepted emails, system logs, snippets of audio. One night, I unlocked an audio file labeled simply, "Briefing 7. My father's voice filled the room, steady and calm. "The primary leak runs through Vaughn's network. He's working with someone inside state to suppress the investigation. That someone has access to NATO liaison protocols and is willing to obstruct OSI inquiries. If Katie ever hears this, know that you were right." End quote. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was damn close. Vaughn's name was all over internal suspicion lists before I was ever accused. And now I had my father saying it out loud, months before I'd been hauled into that review room. The USB that had arrived in the mail seemed to match the file structure of the hard drive, 2 halves of the same message. Whoever sent it knew I'd eventually have both. It raised questions I couldn't answer yet. Who else knew my father had been onto Vaughn? Why send me the first half only after my discharge, and why risk mailing anything at all? The journal's last page wasn't an entry. It was a printed photo, folded twice. It showed my father at a formal dinner, black tie, metal rack on his chest, shaking hands with a man whose face I recognized immediately, General Marcus Delaney. Standing just behind them, partially turned away from the camera, was Emily. I set the photo on the desk and leaned back in my chair. The power had come back hours ago, but the air in the shop still smelled faintly of rain. Somewhere out there, the same people who had ended my career were still operating, still untouchable. Or at least, they thought they were. I shut the shop early that night, locking the blinds before turning on the secure laptop. The photo of my father, Delaney, and Emily sat propped against the wall, staring back at me like it was waiting for an explanation. I didn't have one yet, but I knew who might help me find it. I pulled up an encrypted chat client and searched for a contact I hadn't used in years, Tom Rayner. The last time we spoke, he was halfway across the world, neck-deep in trouble with the wrong people, and I'd burned favors to get him out. Back then, he was a hotshot penetration tester turned mercenary hacker. Now, judging from the generic profile picture and dead status updates, he was keeping a low profile. The message I sent was simple. Need your eyes. High stakes. Old friends only. 2 hours later, the reply came through. Just one line. You've got my attention, Oracle. We set up a call using a voice masking relay. When he answered, his tone was casual, but I could hear the shift in his breathing when I mentioned Vaughn's name. Yeah, I've seen him in a few datasets, Tom said. He's careful. Doesn't do anything himself. Always 2 layers removed. Why are you poking that bear? Because he took something from me. And my father. That got him quiet. Then, send me what you've got. All of it. I hesitated. This doesn't leave you. Please. You saved my life in Kabul. I'm not about to sell you out for a few bucks. I uploaded encrypted copies of the drive segments and the audio file from my father. While he started parsing them, I went digging through my own offline archives, emails, old OSI case files I'd mirrored before losing my clearance. There was a gap in the records from the month before my discharge, as if someone had scrubbed every internal mention of Vaughn. 3 days later, Tom called back. You're not going to like this. Half the IP traffic your dad logged came from a secure subnet in DC State Department. The credentials belonged to someone with diplomatic cover and NATO clearance. I didn't have to say the name. He said it for me. EL. Before I could respond, another voice entered the picture, Bobby Hargrove, my old OSI colleague. He'd been lurking in the same encrypted forum where Tom and I crossed paths. Bobby had stayed in the service, but not in the official channels. I've got something you'll want, Bobby said. Vaughn's going to be in Paris in 2 weeks for a joint US-French gala at the embassy. Word is, he's delivering a package small, high value. I can't get close, but you could. Why me? Because you blend in, and because Emily will be there. You want her cornered. That's the place. I leaned back in my chair. The idea of walking into the same room as Emily made my jaw tighten, but the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. Bobby laid out what he knew. Vaughn was using the gala as a meet and pass. The recipient was likely tied to the same NATO radar breach. Embassy security would be tight, but focused on keeping guests safe, not monitoring the guests themselves. That's not a lot to work with, I said. True, but if you can confirm the handoff, Delaney will have no choice but to act. He's been looking for a reason to go after Vaughn for years. Tom jumped in. I can rig you some toys mic in a cufflink, camera in a serving tray handle, signal burst transmitter for when you need a distraction. I considered the logistics. I'd need cover. A reason to be in the room. Bobby chuckled. Funny thing about embassy events, they always need extra staff. I can get your name on a temp roster for catering. You'd be invisible. Invisible works, I said. That night, I cleared the workbench in my shop and started laying out what I'd need, nothing too exotic. Just tools that wouldn't raise alarms if someone frisked me. I packed a slimline recorder, a fiber optic camera pen, and a pair of earpieces with bone conduction mics. Tom promised to deliver the rest in a dead drop before I flew out. I kept going back to that photo on my desk. My father had been smiling that night with Delaney, probably thinking he'd found someone on the inside who could help. If he'd been wrong, he wouldn't have lived to regret it. The plan was simple on paper. Blend in, track Vaughn, catch the pass, and make sure the right person saw it. But in the back of my mind, I knew the real test would be facing Emily. We hadn't been in the same room in years, and the last time, she'd walked away without looking back. This time, she'd see me, and I wouldn't be the one leaving first. I pushed my coffee aside and opened the embassy floor plan on my laptop, the one Bobby had quietly slipped me through a secure drop. Every hallway, service corridor, and entry point was marked. The catering route ran right through the center of the ballroom, past the VIP seating area, and skirted the private dining section where high-level conversations happened away from cameras. That was my track. Tom called as I was mapping the route. Got your gear ready. Cufflink mic, tray camera, wristband signal transmitter. Battery life for 6 hours, but don't push it. And don't get cute if you get caught. I can't exactly hack you out of French custody. Noted, I said, taking a sip of the coffee that had gone cold. Bobby joined the call. Remember, embassy security will have a manifest of every staffer. Your cover is Catherine Lee, temp hire from a Paris catering agency. Stay in character even if someone from your past recognizes you, especially Emily. I kept my eyes on the floor plan. She's not going to be the problem. Bobby hesitated. You sure about that? She can say whatever she wants. I'm not there for her. The truth was more complicated. I'd spent years training myself to keep a straight face under interrogation, but family digs were a different kind of weapon, and Emily knew exactly where to aim. Over the next few days, I drilled the gala routine until it was muscle memory. Tray in left hand, right hand free for clearing glassware or activating the transmitter. Eyes always scanning without turning my head too much. I practiced keeping my voice neutral in both English and French, switching back and forth without thinking. Tom dropped the equipment in a cafe locker near Gare de Lyon. I picked it up wearing sunglasses and a scarf, just another tourist dodging the drizzle. Back in my rented flat, I laid it all out on the bed cufflinks, charging cases, the modified tray handle with the built-in lens. Everything was matte black, no shiny edges to catch the light. The last piece was the earpiece. Bone conduction meant no visible wire running into my ear, and no one standing next to me would hear it unless they were close enough to kiss me. Tom's voice came through during the test. Sound check. Tell me a secret. And I once replaced the sugar in Emily's coffee with salt, I said. Tom laughed. Spite and sabotage. Classic military sibling energy. 2 nights before the gala, Bobby sent me a short dossier on the key players. Vaughan, obviously. 2 French defense contractors who'd been on NATO watch lists for years. A civilian tech consultant with suspiciously deep pockets. And Emily listed as a senior U.S. liaison on the official guest list. She's been in Europe for the last year, Bobby said. Meetings, negotiations, the usual diplomatic dance. No confirmed link to Vaughan, but your dad's notes weren't exactly random. I scrolled through the photos. Emily at a conference table with French ministers. Emily shaking hands with defense industry reps. Emily at a NATO reception, just a few feet from Vaughan. If anyone else had seen the pattern, they hadn't acted on it. Maybe they didn't want to. The morning of the gala, I dressed in the black and white uniform of the catering staff. No jewelry, hair pulled back, no perfume. I ran my hands over each pocket and seam to make sure nothing looked out of place. The cufflink mic was subtle enough to pass as part of the uniform. The tray camera tested clear on Tom's feed. You've got 6 hours from first guest to last toast, Tom said over the line as I slipped on my jacket. Remember, you're not there to grab evidence. You're there to make the right person see it happen. I locked the flat and stepped into the cool Paris air. The embassy loomed ahead, flags snapping in the breeze, security officers checking credentials at the gate. Inside, the catering crew was already moving trays from the kitchen to staging tables. I fell in line without drawing attention. One of the French servers handed me a stack of flutes and said something in rapid French. I answered without hesitation, my accent smooth from years of practice. He nodded and went back to polishing silverware. The ballroom was even more ornate than I remembered from my service days: polished parquet floors, towering floral arrangements, chandeliers that seemed to drip light. In a few hours, this room would be packed with people who thought they were untouchable. Bobby's voice came softly through the earpiece. Vaughan just arrived. East entrance. He's got a small package in his left hand, now in his jacket. And Chloe. I picked up a tray of champagne and began my circuit through the room, each step bringing me closer to the moment I'd been planning for since my father's journal hit my hands. I wove through the crowd with the steady rhythm of someone who'd been serving drinks for years, my eyes moving more than my head. Vaughan was easy to track: his salt and pepper hair, expensive suit, and that smug half-smile that made you want to knock it off his face. He was working his way toward a cluster of French officers near the west wall. A civilian stood there waiting mid-42nd, slick hair, dark-rimmed glasses. He looked like the kind of guy who'd sell out his own mother if the price was right. Bobby's voice hummed in my ear. That's Duval, defense contractor. He's on every watch list we've got. I kept my pace steady, offering champagne to guests without lingering. Vaughn shook Duval's hand, his left arm sliding just slightly between them. When they broke, Duval's jacket sat differently. He'd pocketed something. The tray camera caught it all. I shifted my angle, making sure the cufflink mic picked up their brief exchange in French. It wasn't much. Duval said, "C'est arrivé." It's arrived. And Vaughn replied, "Parfait." I adjusted my route so I could pass closer to them, catching Vaughn's face in profile. He looked relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday. But Duval kept glancing over his shoulder toward the center of the room. I followed his line of sight and saw Emily. She was laughing with two French attachés, her hand resting lightly on one man's arm in that practiced way she had. Then she looked toward Vaughn and gave the smallest of nods. Vaughn didn't nod back, but he drifted toward the north corner where General Delaney was deep in conversation with the U.S. ambassador. Tom's voice cut in. "You getting this?" "Every frame," I whispered without moving my lips. A waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres stepped into my path. I sidestepped him, never taking my eyes off Vaughn. Duval stayed behind, blending into another group, but Vaughn was closing in on Delaney now. The package was still in Duval's pocket, but the way Vaughn angled himself made it clear he wasn't done for the night. I circled wide, coming up behind Delaney's group. The general had his glass in hand, smiling at something the ambassador said. Vaughn slipped in smoothly, joining the conversation like he belonged there. Emily started moving in our direction. Bobby's voice came low. "If you're gonna do it, now's the window." I shifted the tray to my left hand, my right brushing the transmitter on my wristband. One press, and Tom would flag the live feed to Bobby and Delaney's secure channel. But the moment had to be perfect. Not before Emily saw me. Not before she had to watch it unfold. She reached the edge of the group, her eyes flicking to me like a reflex. That smile, the same one from every childhood argument, every family holiday where she got her way, slid onto her face. She didn't say anything this time. She didn't have to. Vaughn raised his glass slightly toward Delaney, a gesture so casual it could have been nothing. Delaney lifted his own in response. My thumb hovered over the transmitter. The hum of conversation and clink of crystal filled the air, but in my head it was silent, just the sound of my pulse in my ears. Duval was still across the room, pretending to be interested in a painting. Emily was standing 3 feet from Delaney, her gaze fixed on me now. Vaughn's glass tilted toward his lips. I pressed the transmitter. Emily's eyes lit up the second my thumb left the transmitter. She stepped closer, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Look at you, Katie. From Air Force blues to serving drinks at someone else's party. Guess ambition wasn't your strong suit after all." The French attaché beside her smirked politely, clearly enjoying the jab without knowing the history. Vaughn didn't glance at her, his glass was still halfway to his lips. Delaney's just inches from a toast. I kept my grip on the tray steady. "Would you like a refill, ma'am?" My tone was flat, professional, the kind of voice that gave her nothing to work with. Emily tilted her head. That slow little predator's move she used to do when she was about to twist the knife. "Oh, I think you've done enough for one night, unless of course you're hoping for a tip." Delaney turned slightly at the sound of her voice, his gaze brushing over me for the first time. I didn't break eye contact with Emily. My free hand adjusted the tray just enough to keep the camera pointed exactly where it needed to be. Bobby's voice came through the earpiece, low and calm. "Feed is live. Delaney's channel is open. Whatever happens, he's seeing it." Emily must have seen something in my eyes, something she couldn't read, because her smile faltered for half a second. She recovered quickly, sipping her champagne. "Still not talking? That's fine. I'm sure someone here will recognize you eventually." Lyd. Her words barely landed before Vaughn shifted his stance, positioning himself directly in Delaney's line. That was the moment, the one I'd been building toward since the attic floorboard came up. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Glasses clinked, the jazz band hit a soft crescendo, and Emily leaned just an inch closer. "Honestly, Katie, you could have done something with yourself. Instead, excuse me." I cut in, stepping slightly toward Delaney, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice the space between us. Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't look at her again. The general's glass was still raised. Vaughn was watching him like a hawk. I held the tray just below my chest, angled so the mic caught every word. "Sir?" I said evenly. Your drink. And it was a perfectly ordinary phrase, but the way Delaney's brow furrowed told me he'd caught the undertone one professional to another. Emily started to speak again, probably ready with another insult, but she stopped when she noticed Delaney looking directly at me. Do I know you? He asked. Before I could answer, Vaughn gave a short, almost imperceptible shake of his head as if warning Delaney off. That alone was enough to tighten the general's expression. Emily looked between us, confused now. She didn't like not being in control of a conversation. I shifted my stance so my body blocked Vaughn's view of my right hand, the wristband transmitter still warm against my skin. My pulse was steady, my breathing slow. Delaney's glass hovered midair. I leaned in just enough for my words to be private. I bent slightly toward Delaney, the tray balanced easily in my left hand, and let the words leave my mouth in a steady whisper. Ne buvez pas. End quote. Don't drink. Delaney froze mid-toast, eyes narrowing as if replaying the phrase in his head. Then his gaze locked onto mine, sharper now, cutting through the years since I'd last worn a uniform. Oracle, he said under his breath, the name almost lost in the ambient hum of the ballroom. Emily's head snapped toward him. What did you just… He didn't answer her. He lowered his glass and set it on the table, the subtle motion enough to send a signal without a single word. His hand brushed the lapel of his jacket twice, a movement only someone trained would recognize. Vaughn noticed. His smile tightened, but he didn't break composure. He shifted back half a step, scanning for Duval. I adjusted the tray so the camera caught Vaughn's subtle retreat, the angle feeding straight to Bobby. Delaney's voice was low, but clear. Is the package still in play? Yes, sir. Left inside pocket, Duval. I replied, the words barely audible. Emily took a step toward me, her voice pitched in that controlled public diplomat tone. Katie, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself. Her choice of words almost made me laugh. Embarrassing myself. She still thought this was about some petty sibling spat. Vaughn made a move toward the side exit. Delaney didn't move, but the shift in his posture said everything. His attention stayed on me. Stay close. Don't break cover. Tom's voice crackled in my ear. Urgent now. Security feed's been hijacked for 30 seconds. That's all I can hold it. If you're gonna light it up, this is it. I let the tray dip just slightly, my thumb pressing the transmitter again. This time, it wasn't just a signal. It was the burst that sent the live feed to multiple secured recipients in real time. Vaughn's face, Duval's pocket, Emily's proximity all captured. Emily's hand closed on my wrist. Katie, I'm telling you, stop this right now. And deduced. Delaney's voice was calm but carried weight. Miss Lowell, step back. She blinked at him, thrown by the authority in his tone. General, she's… Step back. Her grip loosened. I took one clean step forward, clearing her from my peripheral. Vaughn was 2 strides from the door now, Duval cutting through the opposite crowd. Delaney's hand went to his earpiece. Lock the exits. Now. That. In less than 3 seconds, 2 plainclothes military police officers moved to block the main exit, while another closed in on the side door. The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable, like a current changing direction. Conversations stuttered, heads turned. Vaughn's eyes flicked toward the exits, and for the first time that night, I saw a crack in his calm. Emily stood frozen between me and Delaney, watching the scene unfold without any understanding of how we'd gotten here. General, I said quietly, you have the chain. He gave the smallest nod, his eyes never leaving Vaughn. The tray in my hand suddenly felt lighter. The weight in my arm vanished completely when Delaney took the tray from me, setting it on the nearest table without looking away from Vaughn. His voice was steady, sharp enough to cut through the music. Sergeant, take him. 2 MPs moved in fast, their jackets unbuttoned now, weapons visible just enough to make people part like water. Vaughn turned, hands half raised, working a calm expression he probably practiced in the mirror. General, this is a misunderstanding. Search him, Delaney ordered. 1 MP went for the jacket. Vaughn tensed, his right shoulder dipping. The other MP caught the movement and wrenched his arm back before he could reach whatever was inside. The whole thing was over in seconds. Duval's package slid from Vaughn's pocket into an evidence bag, Vaughn himself in flex cuffs. Gasps rippled across the room. The jazz band faltered but kept playing, probably under strict orders to never stop unless someone was bleeding. Across the floor, Duval saw what happened and made his move toward a side corridor. I didn't wait for a signal. 2 o'clock, gray suit, glasses, he's got the other half, I said into the mic. One of the plainclothes agents peeled off and intercepted him near the service entrance, blocking the door with a casual stance that wasn't fooling anyone who knew what to look for. Emily finally moved, stepping toward Delaney. General, this is highly irregular. He didn't even turn to face her. Miss Lowell, if you have something to declare, now's the time. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted to me, and in that moment, I knew she understood exactly what this was. Bobby's voice came through my earpiece. Package. Has micro drives embedded in the lining. 2 terabytes compressed. NATO radar schematics. Fleet positioning data. Encrypted comms logs. It's the breach, Kate. Your breach. The knot in my stomach tightened, but it wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Every late-night doubt, every maybe I imagined it, was gone. I'd been right, and now the proof was in a military police evidence bag under half the embassy's eyes. Tom's voice overlapped Bobby's. I'm sending you a location ping. It's a secure room in the basement. Delaney's heading there with the package. If you want your chain of custody locked airtight, stick with him. Delaney was already moving. Vaughn between the 2 MPs like a VIP being escorted to his car. I stayed a half step behind, scanning the crowd. Most guests were frozen in place, trying to look uninterested while their eyes followed every move. Emily wasn't frozen. She was trailing us, heels clicking against the marble, her voice low and tense. Marcus, you can't just drag people out of a diplomatic event. Watch me, Delaney said without slowing down. In the service corridor, the noise from the ballroom muffled to a dull hum. The lighting went flat, shadows pooling in the corners. 2 more MPs joined the escort, one taking point. We passed kitchen staff pressed to the walls, their eyes wide. In the basement, a security door waited, keypad glowing. Delaney entered a code, the lock releasing with a heavy thunk. Inside was a stark room metal table, recording equipment, secure evidence locker. Sit him down, Delaney ordered. Vaughn was shoved into the chair, flex cuffs still tight. Duval arrived seconds later under guard, his glasses askew, jacket rumpled. Whatever deal they'd been running tonight was officially dead. An evidence tech in gloves took the package, photographing it from every angle before slicing it open. The microdrives tumbled out like coins. Even sealed in anti-static bags, they looked dangerous. Delaney turned to me. Captain Lowell, you're reinstated for the purposes of this chain. You will witness every transfer from here to OSI. The words landed like a clean hit after a long fight. He wasn't offering a favor, he was restoring authority I'd been stripped of 3 years ago. Yes, sir, I said. Emily stood in the doorway, her arms folded tight. You think this clears her? You have no idea what you're walking into. Delaney looked at her the way only a career general could, measuring, unflinching. On the contrary, Miss Lowell, I think I'm finally seeing the whole board. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Vaughn kept his mouth shut, eyes locked on the table in front of him. The evidence tech sealed the drives in a case and logged them. Delaney signed the form, then slid it to me. My name went under his, the pen smooth against the paper. For the first time in years, my signature didn't feel like a formality. It felt like a strike. Delaney slid the signed chain of custody form into the evidence file, then leaned back against the metal table. Captain, I want to hear it from you. Start to finish. End quote. I took a breath, the kind you take before a long run, and laid it all out: the breach I'd tracked, the data patterns that pointed to Vaughn, the sudden shutdown of my investigation, and the OSI boardroom where I'd been hung out to dry. I didn't sugarcoat it, and I didn't skip Emily's involvement in blocking my access to NATO liaison logs. Emily didn't interrupt until I mentioned my father's journal. You can't possibly be relying on his scribbles as evidence, she said, stepping further into the room. He was retired, out of the loop, chasing ghosts. Delaney's gaze didn't move from me. What's on that drive? I reached into my bag and set the 2 encrypted drives on the table, the one from the attic and the one mailed to me. My father collected these before his death. I've been cracking them for months. Half the files match the micro drives you just pulled from Vaughn. The rest are internal communications linking his network to someone inside state. Emily's arms crossed tighter. Circumstantial. Bobby's voice crackled from the secure comm on the table. Not circumstantial. I just ran a hash comparison. 37 files are byte for byte identical to the drives you seized tonight. Lowell's source had them long before Vaughn crossed the Atlantic. Delaney nodded once. That's enough to justify a formal OSI reopen. And given the chain we've got, nobody's burying this one. He turned to the evidence tech. Get these imaged and mirrored. Secure copies to my office and OSI command. The tech moved fast, slipping on gloves and transferring each drive into a reader. The hum of the equipment filled the room, steady and low. I pulled my father's journal from my bag and opened it to the photo of him and Delaney. I slid it across the table. He trusted you. He left this for me because he thought you'd do the right thing when the time came. Delaney studied the image, his jaw tightening. Your father was one of the best analysts I ever worked with. If he said there was rot in the system, I should have listened sooner. Emily's voice was cooler now. Marcus, think about the optics. You make this public, and you're accusing a sitting State Department liaison of obstructing a NATO security investigation. That's going to blow back on you. End of. Delaney looked at her for a long moment. If you're worried about optics, you're in the wrong line of work. The drives finished imaging, and the tech handed Delaney 2 encrypted copies. He passed one to me. Keep this. If anyone tries to shut this down again, you release it. It wasn't a suggestion. Bobby spoke again over comms. OSI's already spinning up a task force. They're reviewing your old case files, Kate. Looks like your record's about to get a rewrite. Then, the words hit harder than I expected. I'd told myself for years that I didn't care about getting my rank or clearance back, but hearing that my name would finally be cleared, it loosened something in my chest I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Emily stepped toward the table, her voice sharp. If you think this will stick, you're naive. Vaughn has allies, and they'll burn half the Pentagon before they let this go to trial. Delaney didn't flinch. Then we'll bring the other half of the Pentagon to watch it happen. Her jaw tightened, and for a second I saw the flash of panic behind her eyes. She knew the tide had turned, and she couldn't control it this time. I slipped the encrypted copy into my jacket. The weight of it was different from the tray I'd carried earlier. It was heavier, but it felt like the kind of weight you chose to bear. Delaney stood, gathering the files. This isn't over, but tonight we took the first step. And we took it with witnesses, evidence, and an unbroken chain. The MPs moved Vaughn and Duval out of the room. Emily stayed where she was, her heels planted, her face set in something between anger and calculation. I didn't bother looking at her as I followed Delaney toward the door. My father's voice from that old audio file echoed in my head. If Katie ever hears this, know that you were right. Now I had proof, and an open case file to make sure it mattered. Emily caught up to me in the corridor, her heels striking the tile like a metronome set to interrogation mode. Katie, she said, voice low. We need to talk. Alone. I didn't slow down. We've had years for that. You passed. She moved ahead, cutting me off near a side hall. The MPs gave us space but stayed within line of sight. Her arms folded, that polished diplomatic mask firmly in place. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? That you're the hero here. Zero. I don't need to be the hero, I said evenly. I just needed you not to be the villain. Her eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Vaughn wasn't my choice. None of this was. But once you're in, you can't just walk away. That's not true. You chose to stay in. Her jaw twitched. I chose survival. You've been gone too long to understand what it takes to operate at this level. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every favor comes with a debt. I didn't leak those files, but I knew who did. And I kept quiet because pulling that thread would have taken me down too. I let that hang in the air for a moment, so you let them take me instead. Her voice didn't rise, but the tension in it was unmistakable. You were always the better officer. You'd survive it. I couldn't. There it was, the confession, stripped of apology. You could have told me, I said. We could have found another way. She shook her head. You still believe in other ways. That's why you'll always be dangerous to people like Vaughn and to me. The MPs shifted slightly, watching us but not interfering. I didn't want to do this to you, she continued, softer now. But once you stepped onto that floor tonight, you forced my hand. Whatever happens from here, we're both targets. I studied her face, the sister I'd grown up with. the one who used to sneak me candy before bed, now speaking like she was reading from a State Department damage control memo. "You're right about one thing," I said finally. "We're both targets, but you've got something I don't." She raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" I took a step closer, my voice low enough for only her to hear. "A choice you made, and you made the wrong one." Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a second, I thought she might lash out, but she just stepped back, regaining her perfect composure. "If you think this ends with a few hard drives and a general's signature, you're not as smart as you used to be." "Maybe not," I said, "but I'm smart enough to know I'm not standing alone anymore." Her eyes flicked toward the MPs, then to the corridor behind me, where Delaney's voice was giving orders. She knew the net had already closed. I walked past her without another word, the sound of her heels following for just a few steps before stopping entirely. She didn't call after me. For the first time since the night began, the air felt lighter not because the fight was over, but because I finally knew exactly which side she stood on, and it wasn't mine. Delaney was already in the communications suite when I stepped in, a bank of secure terminals glowing against the dim room. Bobby's face filled one of the screens, Tom's on another. Both were already deep in their respective operations. "We've mirrored every byte from the evidence drives," Bobby said, without preamble. "Chain of custody is airtight. I'm pushing the initial breach analysis to OSI, and..." He tapped a few keys. "Congressional Oversight just got a secure alert." Tom leaned back in his chair, the glow of code scrolling across his screen. "Newsrooms are sniffing around too. Somebody at the gala leaked that the MPs walked Vaughn and Duvall out in cuffs. By morning, you'll be on every defense blog in the country." Delaney cut in. "I don't want this spun as gossip. We release facts, not rumors. The data, the chain, the arrest, nothing else." "Understood," Bobby said. "But you can't stop the headlines from drawing their own lines. And they're going to connect Emily to Vaughn whether you like it or not." I glanced toward Delaney. He didn't look at me when he said, "Then let them. If she's clean, she'll have the proof. If she's not, we'll have it." From the corner of the room, an evidence tech passed me a folder. Inside were high-resolution stills from the tray camera. Vaughn handing Duvall the package, Duvall pocketing it, Emily nodding in their direction. No captions, no commentary, just images that told their own story. I slid the folder back and tapped the screen where Tom was running a file index. "Flag every document with NATO headers. Prioritize encryption keys and communications logs. The more irrefutable, the faster this sticks." Tom gave a short nod, his hands flying over the keyboard. The door opened, and a press liaison stepped in, looking like she'd just walked into a classified hurricane. "General, reporters are already gathering outside the embassy gates. Do we issue a statement?" Delaney didn't hesitate. "Yes. Keep it short. Confirm that 2 individuals were taken into custody on suspicion of espionage against NATO allies. No names, no speculation." The liaison left, and the door shut with a quiet click. Bobby's voice came back over comms. "Kate, your father's journal? There's an appendix. Pages we missed before. Looks like he'd compiled a list of compromised defense liaisons, state, DOD, even contractors. Vaughn's just one piece." I felt my hands curl into fists. "And Emily?" A pause. "Her name's not there, but 2 of her closest diplomatic contacts are." Delaney caught my eye. "We follow the threads, all of them." By midnight, the first news alerts hit the wire. The phrasing was clinical. U.S. and French military authorities disrupt suspected espionage operation at Paris Gala. But the undercurrent was obvious. This wasn't just another leak. It was the kind of breach that reshapes careers and collapses alliances. Tom patched into a live feed from one of the major networks. The anchor's tone was grave. "Sources tell us the individuals detained tonight are linked to a data breach that occurred 3 years ago and resulted in the dismissal of a decorated U.S. Air Force cyber officer." I didn't have to ask how they got that last part. The story was out. Emily's face appeared briefly in a clip, shaking hands with a French defense official. The network didn't label her, but they didn't have to. Anyone in the diplomatic circuit would know. Delaney turned from the screen. "This is going to burn hot for a week. Maybe longer, but when it's over, you'll have your name back." I shook my head. "I don't just want my name back. I want every name my father wrote down in that journal investigated. No more quiet cover-ups." He gave me a look that said he understood. "Then, we move now." "All The room hummed with activity again, files uploading to secure servers, phone lines lighting up with encrypted calls, texts printing hard copies for classified couriers. Every movement felt like momentum, the kind that couldn't be stopped without leaving fingerprints. Somewhere in the embassy, Emily was probably already drafting her resignation statement, carefully worded to make her look like the wronged party. It didn't matter. The truth was no longer hers to manage. It was out, documented, and impossible to reel back in. By the time the first wave of statements went public, the embassy was running on caffeine and adrenaline. Every corridor buzzed with controlled chaos. Press officers fielding calls, security staff doubling patrols, and intel teams cross-referencing the seized data against ongoing NATO operations. Delaney found me in a quieter hallway near the operations room. OSI wants you reinstated, effective immediately. Full clearance, back pay, restored rank. You'd be leading the Joint Cyber Counterintelligence Unit. I didn't answer right away. The offer carried weight. 3 years of my life could be put back on paper like they'd never been erased. But paper wasn't the same as reality. Sir, I said finally, if I take that, I'm tied to the chain of command again. And I've seen how easily that chain gets used to strangle the wrong person. He studied me, maybe expecting hesitation for the sake of negotiation. You're one of the best operators I've seen. The unit needs you. I know, I said, and that's exactly why I can't be in it. Not right now. I want to keep doing this work, but off the books. No leaks, no politics. I can move faster if I'm not in a uniform. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but he nodded once, slowly. You'll have my number. If you need resources, you'll get them. Just be careful who you trust. I think I've learned that lesson, I said with a dry half-smile. We walked back toward the secured wing, passing a wall of photographs past joint operations, commanders and diplomats, posing with forced smiles. Emily's face was in more than one of them. Bobby's voice came through my earpiece. Media's gone full tilt. Vaughn's facing preliminary charges. Duval's cutting a deal. And your sister, she's announced she's stepping down. Calls it a strategic withdrawal for the good of the department. I stopped in the hall, letting that sink in. She's not going to vanish, she'll just pivot. Yeah, Bobby said. But for now, she's out of play. I signed the last of the transfer documents for the evidence, handing them back to the tech on duty. My encrypted copy stayed in my jacket. I wasn't letting it out of my possession, not even for a second. Delaney offered his hand. Whatever uniform you wear or don't, you've earned my respect back. I shook it, firm and steady. And you've earned mine. When I stepped outside, the Paris night was still alive, streetlights glowing, the hum of late traffic mixing with the faint sound of music from the gala above. It almost felt like a normal night in the city, if you ignored the 2 armored vans idling at the curb and the quiet watch of armed guards. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking, no driver, no escort. I'd spent years being a ghost in my own life. Tonight, I was finally moving under my own power again. The encrypted drive pressed against my side with each step, a reminder that the fight wasn't over, just different now. My role had changed. My resolve hadn't. The knock on my hotel door came just after sunrise. No security escort, no press, just a uniformed courier holding a slim, brown paper-wrapped parcel. Miss Lowell? Hand delivery, confirmed ID required. I signed for it, the weight barely more than a paperback. Once the door shut, I set it on the desk and peeled back the paper. Inside was a familiar leather-bound notebook, edges worn, pages faintly smelling of the cedar drawer they'd been kept in when we were kids. It wasn't my father's. It was Emily's. Flipping to the first page, I saw the neat handwriting I remembered from when she used to help me with French homework. But now, there was only one short line in English. I chose wrong. No signature, no date. She didn't need either. I leaned back in the chair, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. My mind replayed every moment from the gala, the smirk when she thought she had the upper hand, the crack in her voice when the MPs moved in, the steel in her posture when she admitted she'd let me take the fall. The notebook was filled with phrases, some in French, some in shorthand, the kind diplomats used to take notes without giving away context. Nothing outright incriminating, but enough to map patterns, meetings, names, dates, even a few notes about Vaughn, mostly careful, like she'd been documenting without knowing why. She hadn't given me this to clear herself. She'd given it to me because she knew I'd know what to do with it. I slid the notebook into my bag beside the encrypted drive. 2 separate sources, 2 separate trails. Together, they could close more doors than Vaughn ever opened. Outside, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down narrow streets. Cafes opened their doors, and somewhere a radio played a brass-heavy chanson. I locked the door behind me and stepped into the hallway, coat over my arm, bag across my shoulder. No goodbye note, no forwarding address Emily's style. But she'd left me something better than an apology. Proof. Walking toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. No uniform, no name tag, no rank, just me. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The elevator ride was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every breath. When the doors opened, the lobby buzzed with the everyday rhythm of travelers' check-ins, luggage wheels, the smell of coffee. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool air carrying the distant sound of church bells. Paris was just another city again. No ballroom, no flashing cameras, no whispered orders in French. But in my bag, against my side, were the 2 things that reminded me exactly what I was still capable of. I turned east, toward the street where I'd meet Bobby for a secure handoff. Somewhere behind me, Emily was already rewriting her own story. I didn't need to read it. Some choices can't be rewritten. Some battles aren't about medals or promotions. They're about walking away knowing you didn't bend, even when it would have been easier. My sister's choices will always be hers to live with. Mine will be the ones I can look in the mirror and accept. I didn't get my old life back. I got something better. The freedom to fight on my terms, without asking permission. And in the end, that's all the justice I need.